Hi everyone, my name is Mike Pabian. I'm a real estate agent with REMAX Excellence. Let's get into the Ask Me Anything. First question that we have is, what is a cap rate and why does it matter when buying an investment property? Good question. So a cap rate, which is short for capitalization rate, is an estimate of the rate of return a property will generate. A cap rate can be calculated by taking the net operating income of a property for a given year and dividing it by the current market value of that property. Then you multiply the result by 100. So for example, using that formula, if a property is valued at $500,000 and it has an operating income of $50,000, the cap rate would be 10. It's important to know that the net operating income is the expected annual income generated by the property by things like rentals, for example, or rent, and it is arrived at by deducting all of the expenses incurred for managing the property. The mortgage is not considered an expense in this scenario, and a cap rate is most useful, therefore, if a property is purchased using cash. These expenses include the cost paid towards the regular upkeep of the facility or building, rental unit, as well as the property taxes. It's also important to remember that the current market value of the property is known, but the future market value of the property is variable, and that comes with risk. Market fluctuations can and will impact your profitability and should not be overlooked. So you're probably thinking that a high cap rate is always better, right? Not always. According to a blog post by REMAX Canada titled Cap Rate for Beginners, there is no perfect number that indicates an ideal cap rate, and it's highly dependent on the risk tolerance of the specific investor. So specifically, the article states that, well, great on the surface, a high cap rate of 15% or more usually indicates a riskier investment, as it may mean rents are inflated or that essential building maintenance has been delayed. It also won't have much wiggle room to get better, even in a hot market, and if the rent rolls are accurate, a loss of even one high-paying tenant could cause the annual cash flow to plunge. Lower cap rates of 4 to 6% are often found in stabilized properties within a proven market. Although they'll generally require more time to recoup the initial investment, with a different tenant mix or a few well-placed renovations, these properties can bring in substantially more revenue and add to their appreciation value in both average or hot markets. So in summary, a cap rate is one of several indicators on whether a property will make a good investment, but it should be viewed as just that, one tool in an entire toolbox. Factors like rent roll, which is how stable the rental income is and in what amounts, things like vacancy rates and neighborhood trends can all impact the profitability of a long-term rental.
That was easy.
Okay, so number 2, should I manage my rental property myself or should I hire a professional property manager in Alberta? I'd just like to respond to this question with more questions. So for example, are you willing to attend the property in the event that there's an early morning emergency, such as a burst pipe or maybe a sump pump backs up? How adept are you at managing people? So for example, do you have the time, skill, and ability to work with angry tenants, angry neighbors, inconsistent contractors, non-payment issues? Contractors might cover things like snow removal or grass, for example. And if that's inconsistent, you need to be able to deal with that, and quickly. You also need to be able to deal with things like potential fines against the property, so using inconsistent snow removal or things like not following the rules. If it's a condo property, for example, the condo board will always have a set of rules. Although you can do all of your due diligence, if the renter or tenant of that condo doesn't follow the rules of the condo board, that reflects poorly on you and can also impact your ability to maintain a reputable and profitable business. In addition to that, you also have risk around record keeping. So are your record keeping practices for things like banking information, ID, other sensitive information, is that in compliance with local, provincial, and federal legislation? So for example, even something as simple as storing files on a US server like Google Drive might render your business non-compliant from a privacy perspective. If you're willing to be on call 24/7, you live close to the property, and you want to properly vet your tenants and you trust in your abilities to do so, that can be great, and that can be incentive for you not to trust someone else or to pay the fees to a property management company. But you also need to be confident in your knowledge of the Alberta Tenancy Act, as well as anyone else, If all of those factors line up, then it might make sense for you to manage the property yourself. But in my opinion, with everything said, the risks far outweigh the benefits of working with a skilled and professional property management company. Even things like being away on vacation and knowing that a property manager is taking care of things while you're gone can be a huge benefit to most people. So in addition to that, most property management firms will also have a roster of prospective tenants or renters, and they can assist with things like criminal, financial, reference checks, background checks, so that you can ensure that you're renting to the type of folks that you would want to trust your investment to. As well, a good realtor will be able to refer you to respected property managers within their region, and it should be noted that realtors cannot assist with screening, vetting, showing rental properties, etc., unless the real estate professional has a property management license, but we can put you in contact with the right people. Property management usually costs around 10% of the monthly rent that is charged.
That was easy.
Number 3, what is a rent roll and why is it so important when buying an investment property? Rent roll is a document that lists all of the rental units for a particular building and or property, including the occupancy, vacancy rates, and lease information for all of the rental units. So the information will also usually show who the tenant is, when they started renting, what the terms of their lease are, as well as the rental rate. It's a very useful tool when purchasing a property when there is an existing tenant history, and it can be one of many indicators, just like those other tools in the toolbox that we talked about, that a savvy investor will look at when determining whether a property will generate consistent revenue.
That was easy.
Number 4, is Edmonton a better place to invest in than Calgary right now? The short answer to that is it depends. If we're talking about affordable housing, while both cities have diverse and varied property portfolios, it depends on what the specific investor's goals are. Looking strictly at the numbers for April 2025, the average single detached home in Calgary was going for $749,000, whereas in Edmonton, the average single detached sold for $585,707. So the cost of entry is much higher in Calgary, and it may be good advice to be cautious about how much bigger the market can go, how much higher rather the market can go, before prices start to stabilize. But that's just one property type. While prices are up year over year in both cities, you must also factor in the type of property and how likely that type of property, such as a condo, apartment style condo, row house, for example, how likely it is to increase in value over time, and if it's going to increase in value at a higher or slower rate than other property types. In addition to that, it's also very important to factor in the time in that you want to have in the investment. So we talk about time in market. Very important if you want to gather wealth over time. If you're paying cash and can walk away and sell the property in a year or two, then both cities could offer fast returns as both are showing signs of continued growth in the short term. It really depends on what your goals are, whether you want to keep the property and pass it down to family members, for example, or whether you want to renovate the property and flip it. And there are so many other factors that honestly we could talk all day about. I'd be happy to discuss the differences between each city, but in order to be accurate to your situation, I will need more context. What I do know is that if you like watching playoff hockey in May, Edmonton can't be beat. But if you'd rather watch the Flames on a golf course while Edmonton is pushing all the way to the finals, the choice is pretty clear.
That was easy.
Number 5, what financing options are available for investment properties in Alberta? Several. For one, cash. That would be an easy financing option in that you don't need to finance if you have cash. But I don't think that was the question that you were going for. So you can also leverage property equity or equity from your primary residence and use a home equity line of credit towards the down payment on a second property. Now, things get really interesting when you consider the tax implications of purchasing your first income property. Your primary residence is exempt from capital gains taxes. So what a lot of folks will do when they get into owning multiple properties is they will buy their second home and move into it, which will then become or make that property, the new property, their primary residence. They will then rent out their first home. Capital gains taxes only come into play when you sell your home. So the best way to maximize your profitability is to keep the property occupied and rent it out for as long as you possibly can. Now, keep in mind, profit from the sale of an investment or vacation property and land is subject to capital gains tax because they wouldn't be considered as your primary residence. So, getting back to financing options. You can also apply for a commercial mortgage through your business. If you've got a rental company that you're running, you can go for a commercial mortgage, and the qualification for a commercial mortgage might be a little bit different depending on how your business is structured than it would be if you were to pursue the loan yourself. I am not a financial planner or mortgage professional, so I know that these products exist, but I'm no way offering financial advice here. So I would highly recommend that you do talk to a professional that can assist you in greater detail. Now, the process of getting a commercial mortgage is similar, but instead of using a home equity line of credit where equity is pulled out of your primary home, you would simply be applying for a mortgage where the bank will leverage the rental property until the mortgage is paid off in full, at which point you will own the property outright. So again, I'm not licensed to provide lending advice. I'm not a financial planner. I do work closely, however, with several mortgage professionals who would be happy to help you navigate the best option for your specific situation.
That was easy.
What are the key things that I should inspect when buying a rental property? Short answer is don't do it by yourself. Not unless you're a certified inspector. They have non-penetrative moisture meters, thermal cameras, they can scope sewer lines, they've got industry experience, professional dedicated training that is regulated. So I would say don't, not to diminish anyone's skills or knowledge, but there's only so much you can tell by walking through a property. On the surface, you can get impressions of the state of the property by looking at stickers on the furnace, for example, or moisture stains on the ceilings and walls. But doing so is only going to give you either a good feeling or a bad feeling, but it's not enough information to make a informed decision. So, for example, I've seen new homes with over 50 fix now items that weren't even to the city building code on an inspection, and these are brand new builds that haven't even been occupied yet. I've also had homes built well before I was born that had almost no concerning items come back on an inspection report at all. I should also mention that an inspection is not a pass or a fail scenario. Think of it like buying a used car and getting a mechanic to do a multi-point inspection. That would be comparable to getting a home inspector to go through your house. Whereas looking at a picture online and saying, hey, that car can't possibly have any issues and is a great investment at a good price, is exposing yourself to risk, right? So it's the same thing with purchasing a house, just on a much larger scale with a house. So in terms of it not being pass-fail, a mechanic is only going to tell you what they see in terms of what needs to be replaced or how long a certain thing may last, but they're not going to do any work until you give them authorization to do so, for example. It's similar with the home inspection. The inspector is just there to give you information on the home, but they're not there to give you quotes. They're not there to estimate whether it's safe or whether the asbestos tape is going to become an issue for your family's health. They're just saying, hey, there's asbestos tape. You should probably get that looked at, but that's the extent of what an inspector will do. Keeping all of that in mind, my advice is to remember that this is essentially $600 that tells you if your several $100,000 investment is a good investment. So it's really up to you what you do with that information. But if you do a $600 inspection and find out that there are so many problems with the house that you couldn't possibly see yourself purchasing it, $600 well spent, because now you're not on the hook for a house that is a money pit, as an example. So I think perspective is definitely important when we consider the value of a home inspection and why it's in place and why that's something we want to take care of. Next, what kinds of insurance do I need as a real estate investor in Alberta? So landlord insurance is a good place to start. So landlord insurance, according to tdinsurance.com, a good landlord insurance policy will cover damages to your property, such as the walls, floors, fixtures, heating and cooling systems. If you include furniture in the terms of the lease, that can be covered as well. But it's always subject to the terms of the policy. These terms indicate the risk that you're covered against, such as fire, explosions, wind damage, etc. And they also specify the dollar limits that you're covered up to. Now, they also ensure lost rental income can be replaced if your tenants need to vacate the premises in the event of a covered loss. It really depends on what that specific insurance policy is going to cover. So talk to an insurance professional and make sure that you know what's in that policy before you sign it. So what doesn't landlord insurance cover? Well, it generally doesn't cover items that you don't own. So it's not going to include or cover the renter for their personal items. They need to get the renter needs to get their own insurance for that. And it also won't cover anything that is not included in, heating systems, mechanical systems, etc. So for a renter, they need to get their own renter's insurance to cover their property. So just to dig into that, the renter's insurance and their responsibility, the Alberta Residential Tenancy Act does not require tenants to have renter's insurance. However, it is a common practice in Alberta for landlords to require proof of insurance as a condition of the lease. So it would be written into the lease that if you sign on to this lease, you agree to provide proof of insurance for your belongings, and I will not be responsible for it as your landlord, for example. Again, talk to a lawyer about getting that term in a way that's legally defendable, but it's important to know that it's not a requirement, but you can write it into the lease.
That was easy.
Okay, number 8. How do I evaluate if a property will have positive cash flow? Well, ask the current owner for a copy of their rent roll and income statements for the last 2 years as a start. Working with a real estate agent that specializes in investment properties can also be valuable due to the information that they will have, which might not be readily or publicly available. As well, real estate agents work full-time, so they have time to talk to the property management company. They have time to chase down these documents, and they can be invaluable in terms of facilitating the acquisition of information that you need to make an informed decision.
That was easy.
Okay, next, what are the biggest mistakes first-time real estate investors make? One is a little bit nuanced, but I think off the top of my head, not consulting with professionals, including insurance providers, real estate agents, inspectors, accountants, real estate lawyers, and generally not being knowledgeable on what their rights and obligations are under the Alberta Tenancy Act is the number one thing that first-time investors will get wrong or not be knowledgeable on. So the number one mistake is just not working with professionals that know this industry at a high level and leveraging that knowledge to make sure that you're covered for liability and that you can make a good financial decision. Supplementary answer, I'd also say not being clear on what goals you have can be a huge mistake. And it's also important to factor in what level of risk a landlord or an investor will be able to tolerate. This is especially important if you're working with members of your family or other stakeholders in, say, a small company that manages property or rents property, invests in property, etc. Even if you are longtime friends, if you're family members, if you're spouses, make sure that you get everything down in writing in terms of your risk tolerance and who's responsible for doing certain things, and take your time to ensure that everyone is exactly clear and perfectly clear. There's no ambiguity. When weird situations come up, who's taking care of it? What's our risk tolerance? What's our exit strategy? On what timeline? Can we revisit this strategy in a year? And will we? And when we do, what does that look like, etc. I'd also highly recommend getting everything in writing all the time. Talk to a lawyer, talk to industry professionals, and make sure that there, again, is a written agreement between all parties. Because, yeah, it can tear people apart. It can ruin friendships. It can ruin marriages. It can ruin family relationships. So just make sure that before you do anything, everyone is crystal clear on what the goals are and who's responsible for what.
That was easy.
All right, number 10, how can I legally and safely increase rent on any property in Alberta? Okay, rent increases. So the rules are, and this is right off of the alberta.ca website, landlords cannot increase the rent payable by a tenant under a fixed term or periodic tenancy agreement until a minimum of 1 year has passed since the last rent increase or since the start of the tenancy, whichever is later. So what that means essentially is they need to be in the property for a year before you can bump up their rent. Regardless of when they started renting throughout the year or whatever, they need to be in the property for 365 days. And you cannot increase rent during a fixed term, so you need that term to end before you bump up rate on the rate for the next term. So, notwithstanding the above, there is no limit on the amount by which a landlord may raise the rent. So if you want to do a 50% rent increase, there's no rule against that. Probably wouldn't be the very popular decision, and they might trash your place on the way out, but there are no rules. If the landlord wants to increase the rent, the landlord's notice to the tenant must be in writing, and it must include the date, the effective date that the increase takes place, and the landlord's signature. This notice is required for a periodic tenancy only, so the amount of notice required depends on the type of tenancy. So if you're on a week to week, you need to give 12 full weeks of notice. If the individual renting is on a month to month, they need 3 full tenancy months of written notice. And any other periodic tenancy, whether it's annual or, I don't know, semi-annual, whatever, you need to give them 90 days written notice before bumping up their rent.
That was easy.
Okay, next we have interested to read about real estate investment trusts, best available options locally and globally. Unfortunately, I'm not able to advise on this. It's out of scope. Although real estate is in the title, it is a financial product. So you do need to be a certified financial, I don't even know what the term is. You need to be certified to sell investments, essentially. So I think my response shows you how little knowledge I have on that topic. Not the guy, but yeah, we'll leave it there. What options are available to get equity from your house? First one being home equity line of credit. You need to have equity in the home in order to do that, though, so usually it doesn't make sense within the first mortgage term, the first 5-year period that you have your mortgage. You need to have equity in the house, so unless you're paying down the property, a mortgage rather, it's unlikely that within the first 5 years you're going to have enough equity to make this make sense. Renovations will also potentially add value to your property, but those only kick in once you sell the place. So yeah, you can get an additional bump to the value of your property by renovating, adding flooring, doing lighting, upgrading bathrooms, kitchen, dining areas, but you're only going to see that return when you sell the place. You can also do a cash out refinancing, which could allow you to cash out your existing mortgage and refinance it at a more favorable rate on more appealing terms. Generally, you need to have pretty strong credit to be able to do that, and you need to also be aware that there will be penalties in most cases to get out of your current mortgage term and get into a new one. So not really an option in most circumstances that would make sense.
That was easy.
Okay, next, do realtors advise buyers to get home inspections? Yes, we do. Before closing on a house deal? Yes. It's actually in the contract that the Alberta Real Estate Association uses. The standard template contract includes a clause in there that a buyer will be able to get an inspection on the property done if they so choose. It's a condition of the offer, unless the buyer decides to waive that condition and go forward without an inspection. You guys already know my feelings on inspections. Get one. It always good sense to do that. Even on a new home, if you're buying a home direct from a builder, for example, get an inspection, because the builder hires tradespeople who then might subcontract the work out to, a third party, and you just want to get it inspected. It's good peace of mind for $500 to $700, depending on the size of the property, and once it's done, it's done. So yes, absolutely. Do realtors do it as part of their services? Everything's negotiable, but generally the standard practice is no. The buyer is fully responsible for the inspection in terms of paying for that inspection. Part of the reason is that we want to ensure that there is an extra layer essentially that, for example, if I'm paying for the inspection and then you're not happy with the results of the inspection, does that become my liability? It's generally not something that a realtor will cover. And then the next part of this question, who's liable when the inspected equipment in the home is found to be faulty? It's not a liability issue. It's literally just a state of the property. And because the inspection is taking place before the deal is solid and we've removed conditions and decided, yes, we are going to be fully responsible for purchasing this house, it's just information at that point. There is no liability in the strict sense of the word. It will come down to what the buyer is willing to live with versus what items are a deal breaker for them. You can negotiate everything, but in a hot seller's market, there's there might not be a lot of incentive for a seller that has multiple offers lined up to negotiate on things that you want to have fixed, because what's their incentive? They're going to be out of there soon anyway. A skilled realtor is going to be able to leverage the results of an inspection. But again, the sellers might want to pay for some of that out of the kindness of their heart or bump down the sales price. But a good realtor will price the property and the list price in the first place, knowing what needs to be upgraded or what might show up on an inspection report. So when you see those houses that are, you don't understand why it's $50,000 less than every other house on the street, maybe it's because they know something's going to show up on the inspection. Maybe it's just a good deal, but you won't know until you get an inspection, right? Also, in terms of leverage, by the time that you get an inspection back, the seller knows that the buyer is usually going to be very emotionally attached to the home. They're getting excited, they're measuring stuff, etc. So it really comes down to some really skillful negotiation in terms of who pays for what. To be very clear, there is no pass-fail on an inspection. Cannot stress that enough. Again, get an inspection, it's money well spent. And what are the most effective tax strategies for an investor who combines house flipping with rental property income? Talk to an accountant. The only advice that I can really give you here is just to make sure that you have accurate and timely records and that they're well organized. No accountant that I've ever interacted with loves when you shove a shoebox full of the last 3 years worth of receipts in front of them. So just make sure you got some record keeping. Do them a favor. Saves them time, and usually they bill by the hour. So what is the average time?
That was easy.
In Alberta for listing a house to selling it? 29 days. Both in Edmonton and Calgary for April 2025. Oddly enough, it was 29 days. Now, that's average for single detached. It's going to be different depending on the property type. And yeah, there are homes that sell the same day they're listed, and that's usually at the more entry-level price points. Usually once you get up to, 500,000, 600,000, 700,000, that's where, things generally move a little bit slower, but not always. And so 29 days.
That was easy.
All right, through the magic of the internet, I'm now sitting in a different spot in the same room, different time of day. Who knew that was possible? All right, moving on. Number 16. What is the process for selling a primary residence? Are there associated costs or risks to be aware of? Yes. So to sell a primary residence in Alberta, you'll want to prep the home for sale by getting it decluttered, doing some renovations, removing personal items like photos, artwork, etc., either from the property entirely or at least from the open. So put things in storage, put boxes in your garage, just declutter. And the way that I explain this to clients is you're going to have to move it anyway, so just get started. From there, you'll contact a real estate agent, and their job will be to accurately price your property. I would like to just put in a little sidebar here. Don't work with real estate agents that offer to price your property remotely. There's no benefit to that. It's we can drive by a house, but that doesn't tell us what's inside of it. The condition, it doesn't get us to build a relationship with our seller and understand what their motivations are, what their walk away points are, etc. So if a real estate agent offers to price your property, but they're not willing to come down and spend at least an hour chatting with you about the home and the sales process and why you should spend money with them, move along. From there, the real estate agent will view the home and discuss their value proposition with you. So what do they do that other agents don't? Everyone will say they know the market, they can sell properties, they've got X amount of sales, blah, blah, blah. There are some really big differentiating factors that a good realtor will be able to present to you. For example, if they're walking through the home with cell phone cameras and they're not willing to hire a photographer and pay for excellent photos that draw people into your property, are they worth the same commission as someone that does? I'll leave that to you, but I have opinions on it, that's for sure. So you'll want to ask the real estate agent for past successes and examples of past failures as well, what their strategy is to sell the home. Do they have referrals? Do they have Google reviews? Do people like working with them? Are they willing to provide you with that information? A good realtor will happily be able to say, yeah, call this person. They'll tell you all the great things I did for them. So put them to the test. You're paying them a lot of money for commissions, and it's got to be worth it. Once you agree on fees, The agent will have you sign a listing agreement, and then the home will be listed publicly on the MLS and through social media and other formats as well to get the property out to the market. Depends on the real estate agent, but I also like to go through the neighborhood, talk to the neighbors, especially if it's in a townhouse complex. Gives you a lot of insight on what it's like to work with property managers, or, are the neighbors loud and stinky, or what does that even look like? Once a buyer makes an offer on a property, the home will be pending if there are financing conditions and an inspection condition on their offer to purchase. We talked about this a little bit earlier. So the buyer will make a deposit on the house, which will form part of the purchase price, and this amount is commonly held in trust by the seller's brokerage. Only once the conditions for financing and inspection are satisfied will the home be legally considered as sold. Once conditions are removed, the deposit becomes non-refundable, and both the seller and the buyer can be held liable for backing out of the transaction. On possession day, lawyers for both the buyer and the seller will close the transaction, which includes transferring the property from the past owner to the new owner. They'll confirm transfer of funds, and they'll give permission for the real estate agent to release the keys, at which time the transaction is considered to be completed. Costs include hiring a realtor to market the property using their established methods, networks, MLS access, etc. Typically, the seller's agent covers costs for measurements, photography, signage, advertising, maybe drone videos, etc. You may negotiate cost sharing on staging the property as well. So we know that vacant properties that have proper staging sell faster and for more money than empty houses that don't have staging. With staging, it doesn't mean that we're putting physical furniture into the house. There are a lot of ways to virtually stage now. There are some very important rules to follow when doing so. But if you have any questions, reach out to me direct. So for an average sale, a realtor will use between $2,000 to $3,000 of their own money to ensure a smooth transaction. Now that just goes to pay for things like photographers, etc. That doesn't include their time, their knowledge, their efforts, the showings, returning phone calls, finding buyers for your property, etc. So it's important to consider this when negotiating on the price that you're willing to pay for a real estate agent. There's also a lot of liability that the realtors take on. They're trained to do so. We've got insurance that's specific to the real estate industry as well. So the benefits, in my opinion, obviously I'm very biased, far outweigh the risk. Now, risks of listing a property include being wrong on the size of the property. So for example, if you sell it as a 2,000 square foot home for $500K, but the house is actually only 1,800 square feet, you just overpriced your property based on the size, and you can be held liable for misrepresentation of the true value of the home. Selling a vacant property also increases the chances of break-ins, and we know that that increases in the winter, especially in areas where folks might be looking for a warm place to spend the night. Other risks include theft from the property during showings, and financial fraud or money laundering schemes. Now, financial fraud, money laundering schemes, it's much more common in Ontario and BC than it is in Alberta, but it happens here. There was just a major case that hit the news in Calgary, for example. Other risks include liens on property, dower rights, damage to the home, especially if you're evicting tenants or the home is being foreclosed on, and pricing the property incorrectly. Even if you take a property off the market and relist it, a realtor will be able to see that there is a total days on market cumulative without a sale. So, for example, a lot of listings come off the market in the winter time because volume just goes right down once the snow hits, and sellers will sometimes say, let's just try again in the spring. So taking it off the market doesn't essentially reset the counter of days on markets for that property to zero. There is a cumulative days on market that covers any listings between an actual sold status on the house. There's also a risk in failure to disclose material latent defects, and this can and will get you sued. Pricing the property incorrectly or not getting an accurate price through a comparative market analysis or appraisal can also cost you a lot of money, time, and effort. So for example, if you price a property too high and it's just not worth that, or the market will not pay that price, you're losing time, you're paying people, you're maybe, paying for storage, etc. So pricing it wrong, either high or low, can come with its own risks. So when in doubt, hire a real estate professional. Kind of like when you go to dig a hole in your backyard, just because you probably could dig that hole without hitting a gas line doesn't mean that you should. So call before you dig, call before you sell, call before you buy, talk to a professional, get an opinion. It's a free phone call. You don't need to hire this individual, but they can give you insight and invite you to learn about their business and what they can do for you. And remember that the real estate agent needs to earn your business. If you do not see value in their services, find someone else. It's a big industry. There are over 5,000 agents licensed in Edmonton alone. Be sure that you know who you're working with and that they're a fit for you and your scenario. Okay, moving right along. What are the rules for flipping property in Alberta? I'm assuming that you're asking if there are specific rules for people that purchase and sell a property without ever living in it. The rules I would be cautious about will relate to ensuring that you have all of the necessary permits for the work. So making sure that the renovations, you have work permits and you've got inspection permits, etc. Especially if you're upgrading things like electrical or things that can impact the safety of the home. Very important that you get permits for that work. You also want to make sure that you're meeting the building codes of the municipality throughout the process. Some communities will also have architectural controls that must be adhered to. So for example, I know that in parts of the Hamptons, not all of the Hamptons, but in parts of the Hamptons in Southwest Edmonton, you're not allowed to just put up purple siding on your house if you want to. Even things like the light fixtures on the exterior of your home are regulated because you pay those HOA fees, and as part of a homeowners association, you are then bound to architectural controls. They dictate things like colors you can use for the exterior, lighting. So that's something to look into, or get a real estate professional to look into on your behalf. In addition to that, you will also want to have an intimate knowledge of the market conditions prior to starting any work and have a clear plan for the completion of the renovations. If you're doing a lot of the work yourself, that's fine, but you need to understand that you can't just hire all of the tradespeople to show up at your house on day one. There's an order that things need to happen in, and it's very important to understand how the trades interact with one another and make sure that you're also scheduling these folks in advance and that they're going to be available, that they've got insurance, etc. It can be very risky if you don't know who you're working with. There will also be tax implications depending on what you do with the property once the flip is completed. So for example, if you're selling it outright and cashing out, there are tax implications. I would recommend chatting with an accountant on the tax implications and for information on what properties are most likely to generate the highest returns in a given area. Reach out to me directly. I live and breathe this stuff. I check these reports on a daily basis. So if you are looking for an up and coming neighborhood, I can definitely just off the top of my head talk to you about communities where houses are being flipped successfully. But there are a lot of municipal rules. There are a lot of things to consider. And then also, what's the timeline for construction? I mean, if you're not going to be done this year, I don't know what the market's doing next year. Maybe you won't turn a profit. Maybe there's, some sort of economic factor or a shift in the market or things beyond anyone's control that could potentially have you losing money on that property. So we should discuss that. And although we can't avoid risk, we can mitigate it for sure. So that's my Ask Me Anything, guys and ladies. And people, humans. If you want to learn more about real estate in Edmonton, check out my blog. It's Inside Edmonton. It's updated twice weekly. I also send out a newsletter digitally that comes out weekly on Thursdays, so the next one will be coming out shortly here. My YouTube channel continues to grow, so please be sure to like and subscribe. It helps me out a ton. Please continue to check back, and I know that this is an investment group, so as I continue to deepen my knowledge in the investment aspect of property and real estate, I'll be more than happy to share my knowledge with you guys as well. So any questions at all, reach out. Talk to you soon.